There's a quiet knowing in you that you've always felt but couldn't explain, an instinct that picks up on people's energy before they even speak. You've walked into rooms and sensed tension, looked into someone's eyes and known they were hurting, even when they smiled. But no one ever taught you how to trust that awareness. Instead, you were told to listen to words, to logic, to appearances, and so, over time, you stopped seeing what was underneath. But the truth is, people are always speaking through what they avoid, through how they laugh too loudly, through the way their eyes drift when the conversation gets close to something real. Carl Jung believed that human behavior is a language of the unconscious. Every mask we wear, every habit we repeat, is a symbol of something deeper. An old wound, a buried fear, a forgotten truth asking to be seen. You don't need to memorize tricks to understand people. You only need to notice what most overlook, because even silence is a signal. A sudden shift in tone, a pause before answering, a too perfect story told too often. These are not coincidences. They're the body trying to say what the mind refuses to admit. And once you learn how to listen, truly listen, you'll realize that most people are not hiding who they are to deceive you. They're hiding because they're afraid no one will love what's underneath. This is not about judgment. It's about recognition. It's about learning to see others not as they present themselves, but as they protect themselves. And in that understanding, something inside you begins to soften too. Because when you start to decode the language of the wounded, you don't just read people, you begin to feel them. And in feeling them, you start to finally see yourself. We are taught to trust what is said, to nod when people speak eloquently, to admire confidence, and to assume clarity equals honesty. But beneath the surface of most conversations is a deeper current, one shaped not by truth, but by survival. Carl Jung warned that people often speak not from who they are, but from who they've learned to be. Words become armor, carefully polished to protect the rawness within. And this is the paradox. Many who appear the most composed are carrying the heaviest burdens. The one who always smiles may not be joyful, but is afraid that if they stop smiling, they'll disappear. The one who dominates every room might not be powerful at all, but terrified of being forgotten. And those who seem most certain are often wrestling with the loudest doubts behind closed doors. Imagine a woman at a dinner party, laughing too loudly at a joke that barely landed. Her shoulders are back, her posture is perfect, and her stories are well practiced. Everyone admires her poise. But as the room settles, no one notices the way her eyes flick toward the exit, how her breath subtly shortens when someone mentions childhood, how she grips her wine glass just a little too tightly. These are not accidents. They are the body's quiet rebellion against the performance. Jung once said, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." But a mask is not a lie, it's a strategy. It is the soul's way of staying safe in a world that rarely knows how to hold depth without judgment. And the deeper truth is this: people aren't hiding to deceive you. They are hiding because they've never known what it's like to be fully seen and still loved. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop reacting to the mask and you begin responding to the humanity underneath it. You learn to see not just through people, but into them. And what you find there is not weakness. It's the root of everything real. Once you begin to look beyond the mask, a deeper pattern emerges, one far more subtle and revealing. Carl Jung called it projection. It's the unconscious mirror the psyche holds up to the world, reflecting back the very traits we have not yet accepted in ourselves. We think we are judging others, but we are often speaking to the hidden corners of our own being. When someone cannot stop criticizing arrogance, it may not be because they value humility, but because they secretly long to feel powerful themselves. When someone harshly condemns dishonesty, it might not be because they're moral paragons, but because they are running from a truth they dare not speak aloud. What we react to in others often reveals what remains unresolved within. Imagine a man who always rolls his eyes at emotional vulnerability. He calls it weak, dramatic, even attention-seeking. Yet beneath his irritation is a boy who once cried in front of someone he loved and was mocked for it. That wound never closed. And now, every time he sees softness, it awakens a tenderness in him that still feels dangerous. So he mocks what he once was, hoping no one notices how much it still hurts. This is the painful irony of the human heart. We exile what we fear will never be accepted, then judge others for carrying what we were forced to bury. But if you look closely, you'll see the pattern. Our most intense reactions are rarely about others. They are echoes from within. And here lies the key. If you want to truly read someone, don't just listen to what they admire. Listen to what they cannot tolerate. Their criticisms are not just opinions, they are maps, pointing straight to the shadow. And if you learn how to read those maps with compassion instead of judgment, you won't just understand who someone is. You'll begin to understand who they're afraid of becoming. There's a language we've forgotten how to hear. The language of silence. While we're taught to trust words, Jung knew that the most revealing truths often slip through in what's not said. Silence is not absence. It's a threshold. A person may speak eloquently, yet every pause between their sentences, every subject they rush past, every quick smile that deflects a vulnerable question, it all speaks in volumes. When someone avoids a story, it is not because it holds no weight, but because it holds too much. Imagine sitting across from someone who seems composed and articulate. They laugh at the right moments, nod politely, and say all the things that sound good. But when you ask, what was that time in your life like? Their smile fades for just a second, their eyes glance sideways, and they answer, it was fine. That 1 second, barely perceptible, is where the truth lives. The silence after their words is heavy with what they couldn't say. That's not a flaw. It's a protective instinct. The psyche guards what it still finds unsafe to reveal. But if you listen gently, without trying to fix or force, you'll begin to hear what's underneath. Because when someone falls quiet, it's not always avoidance. It's often grief, shame, or memory rising like smoke in the room. Jung saw language as a defense of the collective self, a way people shield themselves from becoming too visible. But silence strips the mask. It allows the unconscious to breathe. If you want to read someone, watch what their silence circles around. It will point you to the places they don't yet feel worthy of bringing into the light. Doing so will teach you the most important truth of all. People are not hiding because they are deceptive. They are silent because they are still healing. There's a subtle danger in those who seem too certain of their righteousness. Jung observed that when morality is performed too loudly, it often loses its soul. What we call virtue can quietly shift into something performative, a way to avoid the darker work of self-reflection. When someone constantly corrects others, lectures with unwavering conviction, or insists on their moral high ground, it may appear noble, but look deeper and you may find a different story unfolding. Jung warned that the will to dominate can wear many disguises, and one of the most seductive is purity. Not purity of heart, but of image. It's easier to denounce others than to confront one's own shadow. Imagine a man who always speaks about compassion, who writes long posts about kindness, and yet cannot tolerate dissent. The moment he is questioned, his voice sharpens, his posture shifts, and you realize that what he is defending is not compassion, it's control. He needs to be seen as good because he is terrified of facing the places within where he does not feel good at all. We all know someone like this. And perhaps, if we're honest, we've all been this person at some point, choosing perfection over authenticity, performance over humility. But real goodness is quiet. It doesn't need a spotlight. It lives in presence, in how someone treats others when no one is watching. The person who truly embodies kindness does not shout it from the rooftops because they are not trying to prove it. They are living it. Jung reminded us that the soul is not impressed by applause. It seeks sincerity. So, the next time someone proclaims their virtue too loudly, ask what they are trying not to feel. Behind every performance of superiority, there is often an unseen ache, a part of the self still waiting to be forgiven. The most convincing lies are not the ones told to others, but the ones whispered to ourselves in the dark. Jung believed that self-deception isn't rooted in malice but in survival. It is the psyche's way of shielding us from truths we're not yet ready to face. When someone insists they're fine with a smile that doesn't reach their eyes, when they tell you they've moved on yet flinch at a name, what you're witnessing isn't manipulation, it's a defense mechanism wrapped in hope. People build stories not to deceive, but to function. A woman who grew up never feeling safe may convince herself that she doesn't need closeness at all. A man who is told to toughen up may believe that emotion is weakness, even as his body aches from years of holding it in. These stories become the scaffolding of their personality, half-truths woven with survival. And yet, no matter how rehearsed the script, the truth leaks. It shows up in their pauses, in the way they change the subject, in the guarded way they smile when joy should feel free. Imagine sitting across from someone who claims they're not hurt, yet their voice tightens every time they mention the past. They aren't lying to you. They're repeating what they've had to believe just to get by. This is the tender paradox of reading people. You don't decode them by judging the lie, but by understanding why it was needed. Beneath every self-deception is a truth that once felt too painful to carry alone. And when you can see that, when you recognize that the wall was built not to shut you out, but to protect something fragile, you stop demanding honesty and start offering safety. Because healing doesn't come from calling out someone's false story, it comes from giving them the space to rewrite it when they're finally ready. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is the one most desperate to be heard by themselves. Jung understood something few dare to admit, that what often presents as superiority is just insecurity in disguise. It is the psyche's armor, forged not from arrogance but from a haunting doubt that whispers, "You're not enough." When someone needs to remind the world of their greatness, it's rarely because they feel it deeply. It's because, somewhere within, they fear they've been forgotten, and so they overcompensate. Like a child dressing up in a royal costume, needing others to see the crown so they don't feel the trembling underneath. You've seen it before. The co-worker who interrupts every meeting, unable to let a silence pass without proving their knowledge. The friends who flood social media with curated perfection, each post a quiet plea for reassurance. Or maybe even yourself, catching the subtle urge to outdo, to assert, to be seen not just clearly but favorably. In truth, the need to dominate, to correct, to boast, is rarely rooted in malice. More often, it's a wounded place, reaching for dignity, for value, for proof that they matter. Jung didn't ask us to judge this behavior, he asked us to understand it. Because when you pause and look past the performance, you can sometimes glimpse the child who was once silenced, overlooked, or made to feel invisible. And that changes everything. You no longer see a person trying to win, you see a person trying to heal. The more we recognize this, the less we take things personally. The more we sense the trembling behind the throne, the more compassion we offer. To read someone is not to reduce them, it's to expand your sight until it touches the places they thought were hidden. And in doing so, something else opens too. Your own heart, no longer fooled by the mask, no longer afraid of the truth. Fear rarely shouts. It whispers through habits, hides behind politeness, and walks beside us dressed as reason. Jung understood that much of what we call personality is really just a pattern of defenses, an attempt to protect something soft and vulnerable inside. We are taught to admire confidence, decisiveness, and clarity, but what if beneath those polished surfaces, people are simply doing whatever it takes not to be hurt again? A man who over-explains himself in every conversation may not be seeking connection, but permission to exist. A woman who dominates the room might not crave attention as much as she fears being invisible. Even the one who disappears without warning, who ghosts when things get close, may not be rejecting you. They might just be protecting the last piece of themselves that hasn't yet been broken. One woman once told a story of how she always said yes to everything and everyone until one day she woke up with no idea what she wanted anymore. Her life looked full, but she felt empty. And that's what fear does. It disguises itself as helpfulness, charm, and productivity. But underneath, it is simply the fear of abandonment, rejection, or not being enough. When you start reading people through this lens, you stop judging and start witnessing. You stop asking, why are they like this? And begin asking, what pain is this protecting? That shift is subtle, but sacred. It opens your eyes not only to others, but to yourself. Because chances are, you've lived behind your own performance too. Saying yes when you meant no. Smiling when you wanted to cry. Staying silent when your truth trembled in your throat. Jung's invitation was not to expose others, but to awaken a deeper compassion for the world, and for the parts of yourself that once needed protection too. Criticism wears many masks: sarcasm, correction, opinion, but underneath it all, it often whispers the deepest parts of ourselves we're unwilling to meet. Carl Jung saw projection not merely as a psychological defense, but as a trail of breadcrumbs back to the shadow. The moment someone speaks harshly of another, especially with urgency or repetition, it's rarely about the person they're judging. It's about the disowned part of themselves crying out for air. Picture a man who rolls his eyes whenever someone cries, labeling it weakness. What he cannot tolerate in others is the vulnerability he once buried in himself. Or imagine a woman who obsessively critiques others' appearances, not because she sees flaws, but because she cannot bear the mirror of her own. It's not hatred, it's heartbreak turned outward. We all carry places we've locked away, told ourselves were wrong, unlovable or shameful, and rather than face them, we spot them in others and strike. But every time we do, we reveal the outline of our wounds. It's why repeated criticism is never neutral. It's a mirror reflecting what the speaker cannot sit with inside. One man once said, "My father called everyone lazy. I didn't understand it until I realized how ashamed he was of needing rest." That's the secret of projection. It's not just a distortion, it's a confession in disguise. So next time someone's critique feels harsh, exaggerated, or out of place, pause before you react. Ask yourself, what are they trying not to feel? Because the answer won't just help you understand them. It will teach you how to read the world with empathy instead of assumption. And in that moment, you begin to see not just the mask, but the wound beneath it, waiting to be met not with judgment, but with grace. There is a kind of confidence that feels more like a mask than a presence. You've seen it before. The person who enters the room with their back straight, voice steady, and answers prepared before the question is even asked. On the surface, they radiate composure. But beneath the polished exterior, there's a hum of tension, like a wire pulled too tight. Carl Jung taught that false confidence is often a monument to guilt, not mastery. Not the kind of guilt that punishes, but the quieter kind that haunts. The kind that whispers, "You're not who they think you are," and demands a performance to drown it out. Think of a teacher who never pauses to say, "I don't know," or a manager who dominates every meeting, never leaving space for others to breathe. On the outside, they appear certain, but watch closely, and you'll notice the defensiveness in their tone when challenged, or the way they over-explain small decisions to prove they've done enough. That isn't clarity, it's penance. Perhaps they once made a mistake that still echoes in their mind, or perhaps they were taught that only flawless control earns love. Either way, their confidence is not flowing from peace. It is constructed, brick by brick, to keep a deeper truth sealed away. And here lies Jung's deeper wisdom. Real peace does not need to posture. It doesn't seek applause or armor itself in certainty. It simply exists. Quiet, grounded, and open. So when you meet someone who seems unshakably confident, look past the gleam. Ask gently within yourself, what are they trying to prove? And to whom? Because once you stop being intimidated by someone's perfection, you begin to see the longing behind it. The part of them still searching for redemption, beneath the applause. There's a strange thing that happens when people speak too loudly about something they claim not to care about. It's not the volume of their voice that reveals them, but the force behind their certainty. Carl Jung once observed that exaggeration is not a sign of conviction, but of conflict. A soul wrestling with something too close to name. When someone insists again and again, "I don't need anyone," or "I've never been happier," what you're hearing is not the truth, but armor. Exaggeration is not confidence turned up, it is insecurity trying to drown itself out. Imagine a man who tells every room he walks into that he's unbothered by criticism, who laughs at every disagreement with rehearsed ease. At first glance, he seems untouched, even invincible. But pay attention to the way he overcompensates, the way he corrects others mid-sentence or lingers just a second too long on his own praise. That's not indifference, it's fear wearing a mask of certainty. Jung understood that the psyche, when unbalanced, veers toward extremes as a way to protect its most vulnerable truths, and so the more absolute the statement, the more fractured the foundation. Real security whispers, it doesn't shout. Real joy doesn't need an announcement. So the next time someone proclaims, "I'm always fine," ask yourself, not out loud, but inwardly, what part of themselves are they trying to silence? Because it is in the things people repeat too often, too intensely, that their hidden story begins to emerge. And when you learn to read exaggeration as an echo of suppressed emotion, you stop hearing the words and start hearing the wound. Beneath the rigid need to control, there is often a fragile world quietly unraveling. Carl Jung taught that the more someone grasps at order on the outside, the more they are usually battling a storm within. Control is rarely about strength. It is about fear disguised as structure. Think of the person who cannot rest unless everything is in place. The bed perfectly made, the email answered instantly, the dinner scheduled down to the minute. They seem disciplined, composed, and reliable. But watch closely and you'll see the toll. The sleepless nights when plans shift, the rising panic when something unexpected interrupts the routine. This isn't an order, it's survival. Jung saw this pattern not as a flaw, but as a mirror. The outer rigidity reflecting an inner dissonance too loud to bear. One woman, for example, insisted on controlling every part of her family's vacation, from departure times to walking routes, until her teenage son finally asked, "Why are you always so tense on trips that are supposed to be fun?" Her silence said everything. Control had become her way of holding herself together, of anchoring a part of her she had long abandoned to fear. The realization is sobering. People who demand control aren't trying to dominate you. They're trying to stop themselves from falling apart. So, when you meet someone who must dictate, organize, or command every detail, ask not, what are they trying to manage, but what chaos are they afraid to feel? Because the tighter the grip, the more fragile the soul underneath. There is a peculiar loneliness that comes not from isolation, but from performance. Carl Jung understood that when a person becomes more invested in being seen than in being known, they lose themselves in the mirror of others. In today's world, this mirror has multiplied. Every post, every pose, every curated caption becomes a plea disguised as pride. The psychological challenge here is subtle, but haunting. When someone performs too much, it's rarely because they feel full. It's because they feel unseen. The performance is not a celebration of confidence, but a camouflage of emptiness. Imagine a man who is the life of every party, who never misses a chance to tell a joke, make a toast, or turn heads with his stories. People call him magnetic, but his laughter often arrives a second too late, and when no one's watching, his shoulders fall like a curtain dropping after a final act. Once, after delivering an animated speech at a friend's birthday, he sat quietly on the stairs outside, staring into the night. A passerby asked if he was okay. He smiled and said, "It's just quiet now, that's all." And in that silence lived the truth. His identity had become a stage, and the applause was the only thing reminding him he existed. Jung's wisdom pierces through moments like this, not to shame the performance, but to help us see its root. Those who shout the loudest for attention are often those who fear they'll disappear without it. The performance then is not arrogance, but ache. And when we learn to see this, when we look past the polish and into the quiet, the world changes. We begin to listen differently, not just to words, but to what the soul is trying to say through the noise. We stop reacting to the show and start responding to the self that is terrified no one will ever see past it. This is the gift of seeing clearly, not to critique what someone shows, but to understand what they hide. And when you understand that, you no longer take things so personally. You stop chasing approval or fearing rejection because you realize everyone is performing something. The key is learning which parts are rehearsed and which parts are real, and that begins by looking inward first. The next time someone raises their voice in debate, not with anger but with trembling certainty, pause. Pause before you counter, before you correct, and before you defend. Because what often speaks isn't just their opinion, it's their protection. Carl Jung taught that people do not speak from pure logic, no matter how sharp their arguments may appear. They speak from the places they were never allowed to grieve, from the moment their trust was fractured, from the day they were told that hope was naive or that dreams were foolish. The emotional challenge here is profound, to realize that beneath every strong belief is often a quiet injury. Take the man who claims, with a rehearsed scoff, people are only out for themselves. On the surface it sounds cynical, even arrogant. But if you look closer, what you'll see is the boy who trusted too easily, who once believed in promises that were broken, who gave his heart without knowing it could be dropped. His logic is a fortress built brick by brick from past betrayals. He doesn't truly want to believe the worst in people. He's just not sure he can survive being wrong again. This is the hidden architecture of human belief, emotion laid beneath intellect, pain disguised as philosophy. And the truth is, we all do it. We all build stories to keep the ache at bay. We all wrap old wounds in new words and call them principles. So, when someone rejects love, mocks faith, or ridicules vulnerability, don't assume you're witnessing arrogance. More often, you're witnessing someone trying to stay safe. And when you learn to read that, when you listen not to the argument but to the ache, it softens something inside you. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to prove. Because now you understand that belief isn't always about truth. It's about survival. And behind every defended worldview is often just a heart trying not to be broken again. When you see people through this lens, compassion is no longer a choice. It's the natural response. You speak more softly. You listen longer. You begin to heal in the very act of witnessing someone else's hidden war. And that's what Jung wanted for us. Not just to decode the mind, but to remember the soul that still trembles behind it. There's a certain moment, a quiet, often overlooked one, when the mask slips, just enough to reveal what power truly means to someone. It's not in how they speak to those who impress them, nor how they present when praised. It's how they respond when someone stumbles, when someone cries in front of them or fails publicly. Carl Jung believed that the soul reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in how we meet weakness in others. The emotional challenge here lies in the mirror. When another's vulnerability confronts us, do we rush to fix it, judge it, mock it, or do we have the courage to simply witness it? Picture a man in a meeting, polished and authoritative, who watches as a junior colleague nervously fumbles their words. The room grows tense, a few smirks, a few averted eyes. Then, without saying much, he gently redirects the conversation, not to rescue, not to assert dominance, but to preserve the dignity of someone less practiced in this arena. That moment isn't small, it's seismic, because it shows he doesn't draw strength from superiority, he draws it from presence. The truth is, those who shame others for their weakness have rarely sat with their own. Their cruelty is not confidence, it's a shield. But the ones who no longer need to punish, who no longer need to win at someone else's expense, have crossed an invisible threshold. They have looked their own sorrow in the eye and made peace with it. So now, when they see someone faltering, they don't react, they relate. And that changes everything. If you want to truly read someone, don't just listen to how they speak about success. Watch how they treat what's raw, what's messy, what reminds them of their own unfinished wounds. Because that's the real test of character. Not in how someone commands a room, but in how gently they hold what the world has broken. Sometimes, the loudest people echo a silence they have never chosen. Beneath the sparkle of flamboyant clothes, the endless anecdotes that circle back to them, the constant need to outshine the moment, there is often a quieter truth. A fear that stillness might erase them. Carl Jung understood this haunting hunger not as vanity, but as the residue of emotional absence. When someone was once invisible to the people who mattered most, they may grow into an adult who feels safest only when seen. But being seen isn't the same as being known. And so, the more they fear vanishing, the more noise they create to stay alive in the room. Imagine a woman who arrives early to every gathering, overdressed, overprepared, and always with a story so perfect it feels scripted. She laughs just a second too loud. She interrupts not out of rudeness, but urgency, like she's trying to prove she belongs before the moment slips past her. Most people see her as dramatic, but if you listen closely, what you'll hear is a child tapping on the glass of the adult world, asking, "Am I still here if no one's watching?" This is the tragedy behind attention seeking. It's not about ego, it's about existence. The emotional challenge, then, is not to criticize or retreat from people like her, but to understand the ache underneath their performance. Because when someone is terrified of silence, it's often because silence was once filled with abandonment. And the irony is this: the more they perform, the further they drift from what they truly seek. Not eyes, not applause, but presence. A quiet, grounded presence that says, "I see you," even when you're not shining. There's a peculiar ache that rises not from being attacked, but from being misunderstood by those who secretly admire what they cannot yet claim. Carl Jung taught that the sharpness of envy is not hatred in disguise, but longing that has forgotten its own name. When someone lashes out, diminishes, or mocks another person's light, what we often miss is the buried recognition. That could have been me, if I'd let myself believe it was possible. This is why envy so often wears the mask of cruelty. It's easier to tear down what inspires us than to face the grief of not becoming it ourselves. Imagine a man who rolls his eyes every time a colleague speaks with conviction. He calls her arrogant, jokes about her needing attention, and always finds a way to point out her flaws. But if you trace the tension in his voice, it leads to a chapter of his life where he once spoke with that same certainty, until someone laughed, and he decided never to risk it again. Now, when he sees her unapologetic voice, it awakens the ghost of who he could have been. Envy is never just about the other person. It's about the unlived life within us, the freedom we denied, the courage we once silenced, the truth we buried to stay safe. And so, when you're attacked, pause before defending yourself. Ask instead, what part of me reminds them of something they abandoned? Likewise, when you catch yourself judging someone harshly for shining, dancing, daring, ask, what are they doing that I wish I had the permission to do? In that moment, envy transforms from poison into revelation. And if you're brave enough to look through its mirror, you may find not a rival, but a version of you still waiting to be reclaimed. The greatest illusion of adulthood is that we are free. But Carl Jung uncovered a deeper truth. We are not as autonomous as we imagine. We are echoes. We don't act from logic as much as we act from memory, not the kind stored in facts, but the kind buried in the nervous system. Most people are not expressing their beliefs. They are reliving their childhood roles with new faces and fancier vocabulary. Watch closely and you'll see it. The woman who always anticipates everyone's needs before they speak was likely once a child whose survival depended on reading the emotional weather in a room before the storm hit. The man who cannot ask for help who always offers a joke instead of a need, likely learned that vulnerability came with punishment or rejection. These patterns are not random. They are rehearsals we were forced to perfect. And without awareness, we just keep performing them, hoping the ending will be different this time. But the tragedy is this: when you don't know the origin of your script, you believe it is your personality. You think you're just independent or just emotionally reserved, when in fact you are carrying a story that was never fully yours to hold. One man once shared how he prided himself on being stoic and never needing anything from anyone, but when asked about his past, his face softened. When I was little, I remember waiting by the window for my father's car, promising myself I wouldn't cry this time when he didn't show. That boy never wanted to be stoic. He just didn't want to be disappointed anymore. And now, as a man, his silence is not peace, it's protection. When you begin to read people not just through their present behavior, but through the child they had to become, everything changes. You stop taking things personally. You stop mistaking defense for defiance, arrogance for safety, and coldness for fear. The path to truly understanding someone is paved with the question, what did they have to survive to become this? And if you ask it gently enough, you may hear not just the story of their past, but the secret of their healing. Somewhere deep within you, something has stirred. Not a conclusion, but a quiet return. As you've moved through these truths, you haven't just learned how to see others. You've remembered how to feel. You've walked through the corridors of behavior and uncovered the rooms where people still keep their younger selves locked away, untouched by time but shaped by survival. This journey was never just about reading others. It was about listening with the kind of presence that heals. Because to truly see someone is not to analyze them, but to witness them, with the kind of compassion that does not flinch when it touches pain. You've discovered that every defense is a doorway, every habit a whisper, every reaction a memory that wasn't resolved, but rehearsed into adulthood. And now, perhaps for the first time, you realize what you once judged, you now understand. What you once feared in others, you now meet with grace. And, in doing so, you no longer just interpret the world, you soften it. This is the power Jung spoke of. Not the power to outwit, but to outlove. I want to be the presence that doesn't correct, but reflects. Not to fix people, but to see them so clearly that they begin to see themselves. There is a kind of quiet strength that rises when you no longer need to defend or decode, because you've recognized the shared script from which we're all acting. From the loudest performer to the quietest one in the corner, we are all in some way asking the same question. Am I still worthy if I don't pretend? So, let this be your answer, not in words, but in presence. Be the still lake that reveals the reflection. Be the pause in the noise. Be the one who stays soft in a world that taught you to armor up. Because the deeper you listen, the more clearly you will hear the sacred truth hidden beneath every pattern. We are not so different. And perhaps that is the most powerful insight of all. Not that you've learned to read others, but that in doing so, you've begun to remember who you truly are. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.